first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about my hyperfocus as well as my PhD topic for at least 20 minutes. I am Alvin or Alvin. I'm 31 years old. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome back when I was 10 years old. And I am working as a so-called expert by experience in mental health care, and I'm trying to provide peer support professionally to other people with autism or autistic people who are struggling in this not so neurodiversity friendly planet. Apart from that, I started doing my PhD 1 year ago, and I'm studying stress and social pain on autistic individuals. Before I'm going to talk about the social pain aspect, I'm also investigating the Stress Autism Aid. This is a co-created app to reduce stress in autistic individuals. It was created by my supervisor, and she told me I should mention it because we are looking for research collaborations. So if you're interested in this app, it's non-profit, it's free, it's available in 34 languages. Please reach out to me after the presentation. And now the ads are over. Let's talk about the other part of my PhD research, which is on RSD or Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria. It's quite a mouthful if you haven't heard of it, and I will talk about it soon. But first of all, it's not a very popular term in scientific discourse yet. In scientific discourse, we'd rather call it social pain. And to talk about this background a little bit more, I would love to go back to our ancestors because back then, in order to survive, it was extremely important to be part of a group. Basically, if you are ostracized, if you are excluded, yes, you wouldn't be able to feed yourself and you were dead. And that's why over time, the brain has developed a lot of mechanisms that help you subconsciously or consciously in order to stay connected with people and retain these human bonds. For instance, we can feel really happy when we do feel those bonds and we do feel connected to other people. But on the other hand, we can also feel terrible when we are excluded or rejected. And um, for instance, the moment we are even noticing we may be getting rejected or criticized, excluded or ostracized, our brain regions activate and start giving us some very distressing sensations. And apart from the fact we may feel bad and feel stressed, we may even feel physical pain. And that's because these brain regions that are processing rejection are the same ones that process physical pain. And that's why in common discourse, we are saying that once you are being rejected or excluded, you can feel hurt or you can feel heartbreak. So in science, we started adopting this term called social pain to all these responses we get when we feel rejected. And while it's very adaptive, this social pain when we are rejected, it hasn't really evolved to cope with rejection for longer periods. Because as I just said, once you were rejected in the past, in prehistoric ages, you are dead anyway. So when people are being rejected or excluded for longer periods, some really heavy side effects can occur. And when I talk about rejection and exclusion and not being accepted, it's a small bridge to neurodivergent individuals. Because neurodivergent individuals often feel extreme social pain. The moment they feel rejected or criticized, they can feel a lot of emotions. They can feel extremely paralyzed. They cannot be able to function anymore. And while they don't use the word social pain for it, they often use the word rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And interestingly, that's not a word that was made up by neurodivergent people. It's already been there in scientific discourse in the 1960s, in which it was proposed as a subtype of depression. especially in women, which would be more resistant to treatment. However, it has become a bit obsolete as a term, and it was recently popularized again by this American psychiatrist named William Dodson, who found out through the notes of an ADHD pioneer, Paul Winder, that people with ADHD or ADHDers are extremely sensitive to rejection. And though he didn't notice it himself, he started asking his clients, like, do you experience this? And basically, all of his clients 10 years ago said, yes, I feel this RSD. I feel this extreme social pain when I get rejected or criticized. And even one third said, well, this may be the most debilitating part of being an ADHDer. However, he still didn't truly understand it because he didn't notice it, and he started calling it their deepest, darkest secrets. He didn't realize, along with a lot of clinicians with neurodivergent people, is that neurodivergent people are great at masking their traits and masking their struggles. So he started writing about it on gray literature, on websites such as Attitudes, and basically these articles blew up. It became the most read topic on this Attitudes website within a year. And I just checked a week ago, and hashtag RSD has over 750,000 posts on Instagram alone. In other words, it's a very large topic on social media within autistic and ADHD individuals. And yes, initially he said like it's a symptom of ADHD, but right now other neurodivergent communities have adopted this term and have identified with RSD as well. I'm going to skip this one, but I'm going to show this one, which is just a simple TikTok of a person who's both an ADHDer and autistic. And he's talking about his experiences with RSD and where it comes from and how it affects him. I hope you can hear it. If you don't, please let me know.
We don't have the audio, but maybe it's fine because we do have the subtitles of the video.
Okay, I'm just going to give it a quick check. You should be able to hear it now. Let's try again.
Being invalidated by someone you care about hurts. It hits you in the chest like a ton of bricks, but it's local to that interaction. If you get invalidated by everyone you care about for a long enough time, you start to believe them. You start to internalize the invalidation and you change yourself until they validate you. By this point, you've already had to change so much about yourself to avoid rejection that you start trying to predict it. You start seeing it where it isn't. You start seeing it in the expressions on people's faces. You start hearing it in their tones of voice. You start feeling it in the absence of a text message. This is how rejection sensitivity dysphoria is born. It controls the life of so many neurodivergent people. Oftentimes the inevitability of rejection is the only consistent thing in a neurodivergent brain. Honestly, I have no remedies or answers in this video. I struggle with this every day, and despite so much effort and so many hours of therapy, it still dictates a lot of the way that I think. This is just an awareness post, because neurodivergence is so fucking hard and there's so many parts to it that people don't see from the outside. I love you guys. Have a good
Well, there's quite a lot to unpack here. I think you can see the burden of this person's RSD. But mostly what's really interesting to me as well, both an expert by experience and a scientist, is he's talking about where his RSD comes from. But as I already explained, a lot of science in the sensitivity to social pain in general is about the fact that evolutionary, our brain hasn't evolved to cope with long-time rejection and can turn into an overdrive. And it's also what he's saying, that through life experiences, he's basically seeing rejection everywhere, and it hurts a lot. Interestingly, as I just said, William Dodson thought that RSD was a symptom of ADHD. And he's someone who says that, well, yes, life experiences may affect this, but you're already born with it. So that's really interesting for future research to find out where it really comes from. I am seeing some questions in the chat. I'll answer it after the presentation. So if you have any questions right now, please feel free to write them down.
Being in
Now, I can talk about what science says about RSD for a long time, but in general, there isn't a lot of evidence on it. There are studies who study other constructs really closely related to RSD, but in general, in neurodivergent people, it's mostly about finding out whether they are more sensitive to rejection than neurotypical people. And while that's an interesting topic, it doesn't really help neurodivergent people, except for maybe giving them some validation. There's an extreme lack of research on causes of this RSD or ways to reduce it. So basically, I just started a year ago in my PhD, and I was like, well, what should I do? And I thought, well, why don't I just interview people who experience RSD and see what they come up with? So that's what I did. I recruited 19 adults who are autistic. And I asked them questions based on analysis of what I found on social media. So the themes they were already talking about, but also the themes I could not identify on things that may or may have not helped them. And I came up with 5 different themes in their answers. And while I don't have time to go through them completely, I hope this paper will be accepted soon so I can really share it on social platforms. I will touch on it briefly. First of all, they talked about RSD the same way as on social media. So when I said, what is RSD? They said, like, well, the slightest bit of rejection or criticism can cause extreme emotions, extreme anger, extreme anxiousness, shame, embarrassment, and a lot of physical sensations, even tension, paralysis. And well, this person said it really well. Being stabbed in the heart by a knife, which then keeps on pushing nicely. These feelings could remain for a very long time. Second, when talking about the consequences, people also said it could take over my life. My entire life will become about avoiding rejection and avoiding criticism or exclusion. And what they mostly try to tell me is that people always say, well, yes, uh, neurodivergent people are masking their traits to avoid rejection because, well, rejection isn't a nice thing, and yes, it is logical that they're doing this. But what these people taught me is that rejection is so incredibly hurtful that it's logical that they're going to do everything in their power to avoid it. So that's another aspect of the masking that hasn't been fully recognized in research, in my opinion, that they don't just mask to avoid rejection. No, they try to avoid this extreme sensation following rejection as well. In other words, maybe once neurodivergent people are in a society in which they are allowed to drop their mask, and still, even then, maybe they need some support in well, how they can handle these feelings and sensations. Third, and that's a topic I didn't really prepare for, but it's logical. It's people being rejected over their responses to rejection. There's even a scientific term for it. It's being studied for about 2, 3 years now. It's called social pain minimalization. And that's people saying that, well, when I share my RSD with other people, I'm just being rejected even more. People are telling me that, well, just don't be this sensitive. Oh, it's not there, or you're just being too extreme, or, well, that makes them feel rejected once again. Or even worse, when they are showing emotions and feelings, they're often being bullied or teased because of it. So these people thought that they are in an infinite feedback loop of just being rejected over the rejection, over the rejection, over the rejection, and they couldn't get out. And it also shows how important it is that other people start validating their feelings and needs even more. Just get out of this cycle. Fourth, the predispositions. A peer reviewer told me to call it this way. I'd rather call it causes of RSD. Where is it coming from? Um, there's two different stories. First of all, as I said, people often call it some sort of a PTSD or a chronic PTSD, even from being rejected throughout your entire lives. Just cause this social pain system in the brain to turn into an overdrive. But others also said that could be an interaction with autistic traits. For instance, they said they were sensitive to well, emotions and stimuli in general, had a sensory sensitivity, makes them feel more social pain. Or others said that, well, I'm someone to hyper-focus on events, so I also hyper-focus on these rejections all the time. And a third group of people said, well, maybe this double empathy problem is also influencing because when I don't really understand whether I'm being rejected or criticized, and I already have these experiences in my life that I'm often rejected, I'm just going to assume that people are going to reject me in the future. So once again, it will be really interesting to assess in more different methods where people's RSD is coming from, and by that, how we can alleviate it. And then finally, in my opinion, the most important topic, what did these people say helped them with their managing their RSD? There are quite a lot of different answers, stemming from people saying that distraction could help them, for instance, or learning more on RSD, or even just finding one or two people, this safe bubble of people who are like, okay, they understand you. They even laugh about RSD. We can talk about RSD in a good way. We can share memes about it. I can get on social media and just discuss it, and people are like, "Oh yes, RSD. I understand it. I get it. I also feel it." That already helped a lot to people, and that's what I mostly found out. This peer support didn't really help them in experiencing less social pain or experiencing less heavy emotions, but they could just cope with it and just see it more of an aspect of something a lot of people are struggling with. Um, Apart from that, there's also a group who talked about therapy, and these experiences were mixed. Once again, there weren't a lot of people who said it actually reduced their emotions and feelings when they were perceiving rejection. But there was one group who said, well, I can handle it better, for instance, by understanding that the other person may have not meant it that way, or by just accepting it, practicing mindfulness, for example. But there was also a group who thought that therapy only made their RSD worse. For instance, through people who received cognitive behavioral therapy, they felt that they were being gaslit by their practitioners, by them just saying, well, your feelings and your thoughts aren't true. And it only triggered the RSD even more. So what I also, if you are a clinician and you are here, it's extremely important to validate the feelings of neurotypical people or neurodivergent people in general, but especially their feelings of rejection and exclusion and the fact they're not always welcome in the society. Because if we try to challenge that, maybe you're invalidating them and you're only triggering their RSD even more. So now I have this, and now what? Well, I really want to start investigating interventions, ways to reduce RSD or at least help people cope with them better. Sadly, I have some supervisors who are probably right in saying I should do some more basic research first before deciding on an intervention. So right now I'm working on two things. I'm working on scoping review, which is basically just a paper which is collecting all the available evidence on RSD and autism. And that's quite difficult because, as I said, there isn't research directly on RSD, but there is research, for instance, that compares cortisol values of autistic and neurotypical people after rejection. That already says something about RSD. So I'm trying to gather it all in one paper. And I'm using the Dutch Autism Register database to compare the social pain of autistic and neurotypical people, to just get some more insights on indeed whether, on average, autistic people are experiencing RSD. And I'm also testing three associations with questionnaires in that database, which is self-esteem, perspective taking, so the skills to understand other people's emotions and feelings, and sensory sensitivity to get a basic feeling on where RSD may be coming from. Then next year, I can add some more questions to this database, and I'm looking forward to investigating life events and consequences related to RSD. So is it true that people who have been bullied, for instance, in their life, or have some attachment issues, or maybe have been mistreated during their life, experience RSD more often? And I'm also looking forward to just see, well, these people who said they experienced more social pain in 2025, are they going to have, for instance, more depression or more anxiety in 2026? So I can really investigate how RSD affects them. And it hopefully gives me a better overview of their challenges. And then finally, I hopefully have my PhD and I have a little bit more freedom in what I can study. And I really wish to start with a focus group of neurodivergent people of all kinds, of all backgrounds, um, who can help me in selecting one or two interventions to study. And I'm open for anything, whether that's medication or mindfulness-based therapy, or even just an intervention to increase autism acceptance or neurodivergent acceptance of neurodiversity in general, and just see if it can reduce people's experiences of RSD over time. All right, this is my last page. Here are my contact details if you're interested in knowing more. And I'm going to take a look at the questions I'm seeing in the chat right now. So if you have any more questions, please write it down now and I'll answer it. And otherwise, you can always contact me on social media. Okay, first, I'm getting a question by Anna. You had a nice presentation before, by the way. I was able to see the last minutes of them. Is there is research about RSD and self-stigma, internalized stigma? Well, not really directly about stigma, but there is some research about people with RSD or people who are sensitive to rejection, also rejecting themselves even more. So that's what I also found in my qualitative study. People could even feel RSD when, for instance, they were doing a task and they felt like they weren't doing it perfectly. So I do think people very quickly internalized these feelings of RSD and even had this voice in their head rejecting them. And yes, that shows that it's everywhere. So yes, it would be interesting to study that more in the future.
Yeah, that seems like a very strong link between these two. Thanks.
You're welcome. And then I have a question from Steven. Don't people with ADHD see rejection as a failure of their masking behavior? Yes, that's even one cognition that also came across. And that's also linked to the question Anna said. Like, when people do feel rejected, what I noticed in my study is that the moment they are rejected, they're already saying, I failed. I didn't mask well enough. I didn't adapt to society well enough. So they it's so quickly to internalize it and say it's their problem instead of, well, what apparently a lot of neurotypical people do is to just blame the other person. And I think that's one amazing strength of neurodivergent people, that they are so, well, critical of themselves and they can reflect on their own behavior so well. But on the other hand, as you can see, it can be really debilitating and hurt them. And then I'm getting one more question from Anna, and she's asking, it would be very interesting to see how RSD is associated with early maladaptive schemas. Yes, that's really interesting to me too. Generally, when I'm talking about literature on social pain, people are mostly finding that indeed the earliest experiences in life are most influential to these feelings. Um, for instance, there are people arguing that, well, when you are, this is really hard, but if you are rejected quite often as a small child, for instance, by your parents ignoring you, you just learn that rejection is everywhere and you need to do everything in your power to stay connected to people. So this brain develops this overly sensitive social pain system. And it would be really interesting to see to what extent that also explains the RSD and neurodivergent individuals, because they generally, from being born, have, well, worse experiences with being included on this planet. All right, well, that's the final question. So if you don't have any more questions, I would like to thank you so much for your time. Um, and in my opinion, we can go along to the next presentation.